Live from inside Joe Biden's campaign headquarters, this is Observations, the podcast for Sunday, the 30th of July, 2024. Everything seems fine. I'm Dale Franks.
I'm Michael Wade.
And, you know, there is something that everybody's going to want us to talk about, and we are going to talk about it. Which is the debate. But let's get to that a little bit later. I'd like to start off with the Supreme Court this week. We kind of previewed last week. I think we had a pretty good idea of where the Supreme Court was going to come down in terms of Chevron, especially in light of what the court has been doing in terms of deference to federal agencies since 2016. And Chevron is now dead as a doctrine. What people don't know often is that Chevron did not exist prior to 1984. It is like qualified immunity, a judicially created doctrine that, as I said, did not even exist before 1984. We've lived with it now for 40 years, and I think I'd have to say the results have not been great.
Yeah, what it's done is entrench the bureaucratic state, the political class, but it's made the law almost unknowable for regular citizens, the ones who are actually governed and have to comply with and abide by these various regulations and the reinterpretations of them. We just saw this recently with Title IX, where the Biden administration decided that, sex actually means gender orientation. Okay, so the whole argument going into this was that sex and gender are different, and now you're conflating them. I mean, how are we supposed to work with that?
Well,
and
it goes beyond
all the
that.
issues with that.
We had, which the Supreme Court answered a couple of weeks ago, we had the BATF ruling on bump stocks, or
right.
ATF, rather, it's what they're now called. These agencies have been allowed to basically, and look, it's not just the agencies. I mean, there's a fundamental problem in Congress, which is that they don't write the law with enough specificity, because that one sentence, the Secretary of X shall have the power to enforce this legislation through appropriate regulation, under Chevron, has opened up a hole big enough to drive a truck through.
Yeah, and let's understand what Chevron is and what the overturning of it does. It does not change the fact that agencies will come up with their own interpretations of the law, that they will do their own fact finding. That's still going to exist, and the fact finding is still going to be judged in a court under clear and erroneous. There will be rulings that will be looked at under the standard of arbitrary and capricious, but there's no deference to the agency's interpretation of the law, or reinterpretation of the law, as it were. The courts get to decide that de novo. And I thought Gorsuch's opinion laid out very clearly why that should be the case, and why it was the case before Chevron. So all we're getting now is that you're still going to get these regulations, you're still going to get this overreach, but now it's challengeable in a court of law, and the agency's interpretation of the statutory language is not sacrosanct. It doesn't have to be deferred to. The court itself can reason what the law is. This goes back to Marbury versus Madison.
The two arguments that I've seen against this week's decision, overturning Chevron, neither of which seems to me to be super legitimate, but one of which is more colorable than the other, which is that that overturning Chevron gives power to the federal judiciary to legislate from the bench, because now It gives the court power over all the federal agencies to determine whether they can or can't do the regulatory the regulatory regulation that they want to do in deference to the laws that Congress has passed.
To introduce myself.
Please allow myself to introduce myself. But
the thing is that since when has the left ever cared about legislating from the bench? I mean, that's been their lawfare scheme since the 60s. That's what they expect. That's what they want.
Yes, but that was before we had a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court.
Right.
Now we don't care much about the Supreme Court. In fact, the Supreme Court is illegitimate. It's being run by these conservative ideologues, and we need to pack it with, 12 more members that Joe Biden gets to pick so that we can put the court back on the right track, right? That argument about legislating from the bench was convenient when they were fairly sure that they were going to come on top in that judicial legislation. Now that they are no longer sure, in fact, quite sure that the reverse will happen, now the Supreme Court is elevating itself, and that's an argument I've heard, elevating itself above the other two branches.
Yeah, well, that doesn't really make any much sense. I mean, this is the old Marbury versus Madison argument, whether or not the court arrogated to itself the power to decide what it is and isn't constitutional. And the fact of the matter is somebody has to decide, right? In order to have any kind of grounded law, somebody has to make the ultimate decision. And I would think that the Supreme Court's in the best place to make that decision.
You would think so. However, having said that, others disagree.
Mark Joseph Stern is exactly.
Well, he is one of the others who disagrees. And again, he puts forth that this is a major transfer of power from the executive branch to the judiciary.
To the legislature, but, good job there, Mark Joseph.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. And here, this is the second argument. And I brought this up basically because I wanted this response. Is it now only Congress that can rewrite legislation? Yes.
That was the whole freaking point you brought.
Yes, you have correctly interpreted what's happening.
Your terms are acceptable.
and though I don't usually go to the BBC for analysis of American law, I will say that they're right up on it. Seems to be fairly open-sided or even-sided until you get to the very end. The problem is that many people think the Congress is quite dysfunctional now, says Philip Bobbitt, an expert on constitutional law from Columbia Law School. Where the court is going seems to defy the realities of gridlock in Congress as it's actually operating today. Assume, arguendo, that is true. The question then becomes, so what? This is the system of government we have. And if your argument is that Congress is not well suited to write legislation, which, then the answer is the way that we change our system of government or the structure of our government and how it works would then seem to be to amend the Constitution to change our system of government. The answer, in my mind, would not seem to be, well, what the hell? Let's just let the executive department decide everything.
Well, and as with the SEC case, too, I mean, looking at these two together, essentially the ruling in the SEC case was that the executive cannot be both the prosecutor and the judge. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. And that's too much power in one hand. So the court is the relief that people should have if they feel they are wronged by government action. And it's just such a natural thing. The reason that we split up, that the founders split it up into three separate co-equal branches, was specifically for this purpose, so that no one branch had too much power, that they each could act as a check on the other.
Yes, but that's...
And really the courts...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, really the only court's check is to look at the facts and the law and make a decision about what the law is. I mean, it's really its only purpose.
What I find interesting about this second argument, which is basically that the executive branch should have the freedom to regulate, because after all, they're the experts. They're the pros from Dover. They're the ones who know
This was
these
the
issues.
technocratic argument from the 80s, and that actually led to Chevron.
The 80s? How about the progressives in the early 20th century?
In the 20s, that's true, yes.
I mean, that progressive argument hasn't changed, and we just see it explicitly here. The Supreme Court Chevron ruling hamstrings the executive branch. Yes. And what I find very interesting about this argument specifically, is that it tends to be coming from the same people who keep assuring us that this election in 2024 is an election to defend democracy. So on the one hand, they're all big on democracy, except when it comes to how the laws are interpreted. Then all of a sudden,
and
unelected
enforced.
bureaucrats in the executive branch are the ones who should actually be making the laws, and Congress should be doing, under this scenario, I'm not entirely sure what.
Whatever the executive branch wants, I think.
Apparently, I mean, this is, if you love democracy so much, why are you arguing in favor of unelected bureaucrats to be the ones who actually make the laws that we have to live by without any sort of democratic audit, whatever? Say what you want about Congress and its dysfunction and the fact that it's largely filled with the lower third of your high school graduating class. The fact is, that is their job. They're the ones who are supposed to be making these rules. And seeing legislators come in and say, well, this is just impossible for us. This is why we need these executives. We can't make these laws. We don't. Well, then maybe you shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, and that's why this decision is so profound too, is that as the federal government has grown, and especially the bureaucratic state, they have reached ever deeper into our intimate personal lives, and they're unelected, and there's no way to get rid of them. They're protected by civil service laws. They have factions within factions. It is an absolute Byzantine nightmare to try to take apart the deep state one piece at a time. This decision did more than Trump ever could in another 4 years, or even a total of 8 years.
Well, here's one of the reasons why I find that second argument so lacking in any sort of compelling intellectual heft, let's put it. Let us assume that the people in Congress are generally dumb, but I repeat myself. Fine. If that is so, well, we still have all of these bureaucrats. We have all of these experts who are working at these agencies. It seems like when Congress wants to write a law to regulate the environment or occupational health and safety, or basically anything else that they want, that they could hold, I don't know, if only there was some mechanism by which smaller portions of Congress could get together and invite people to come in and speak to them. Let's call them committees, for lack of a better word, where they could actually talk to these experts and receive advice about what the best way of regulating them, regulating the topic at hand might be, and then incorporating those recommendations into legislation. It almost seems like that should be possible. And indeed, we have a structure in Congress that does exactly that. I mean, this argument is largely that Congress should completely abrogate its lawmaking power, except to the extent to tell a federal agency, hey, regulate this thing to death, preferably, and you just do whatever it is you want to do, rather than sitting down and writing the legislation with enough specificity so that regulators, whenever they are given whatever freedom they're given to regulate, create regulations that comport with that law. You know, one of the interesting things about this week, and we aren't really talking about it, but it was the other decision in terms of the prosecutorial overcharging of the J6 defendants using Sarbanes-Oxley statute for impeding an official proceeding, just to tack on a 20-year sentence, possibly, to a riot in the Capitol. And the Supreme Court said,
and it was stretching the purpose of that.
Yeah, exactly. And the Supreme Court said, nope, can't do that. That's not what the law was designed to do. It's not applicable to this situation. And if the court is in that position, I think we're probably all better served for the court to be there, potentially, although we know how that there'll be plenty of decisions on both sides, who are there to protect the average citizen from, dare I say, the depredations of government officials who've decided to push the laws far as they can reasonably interpret it.
Well, I'd much rather be in a court of law where the presumption is either completely equal, or I'm presumed innocent if I'm a defendant, than in a system where the deference not only from the judiciary and Congress is to the executive branch, which is prosecuting you, and also to their ALJs, who routinely side with the government like 90% of the time. I'd rather know that I at least have a shot.
Right, because the second you are coming up face to face with an agency on the agency's own terms, you're just not going to win that. Right.
And pairing this also with the right to a jury trial, the Seventh Amendment case, I mean, we're looking at a serious, I think, reconstitution of individual rights that are have fealty to the actual Bill of Rights and to the Constitution itself, which we have not had now for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to point to something that changes the system of government, I mean, Chevron was that.
Mm-hmm. And that was during the Rehnquist court, as I recall, right?
84. Yes, that still would have been Rehnquist.
Yeah.
As the Chief Justice. He stuck around for a very long time. But now it's gone. And, you know, the weeping and moaning from the left, you know, your salty tears are an enjoyable beverage to me, because we already have enough power in the executive branch, and giving it more is not the way to go.
Absolutely agreed. I mean, that is the Leviathan you need to worry about.
Yeah, because look, I find it fascinating when people talk about Congress today and say, you know, with the gridlock in Congress and the blah, 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 blah. When has Congress never been partisan? When has Congress never been gridlocked? I mean, I think you would have to go back to, you know, the 1830s and the era of good feeling, when there was one political party in this country, to come up with a nonpartisan, non-gridlocked Congress. Anytime Congress has been close, nothing has ever gotten done. And we can go back to, you know, Truman running against the do-nothing Congress of 1952, all the way back to, you know, the Federalist era. And Congress is that's the whole point of Congress.
Exactly.
In fact,
that's right.
The whole point of the Senate was that just in case the House of Representatives got a little too stroppy and started passing too many laws, that the Senate would be the saucer that cools the cup of tea so that those passions... We have a system that is predicated on a Congress at the federal level that does as little as possible.
Right. The whole idea, Madison explained this very well in the Federalist Papers, that, what was it, the vicissitudes and vagaries of the common folk should be hashed out in the House, the one branch of government closest to the people and most representative of the people. And this is where all the nonsense should take place. Then the cooling, prevailing heads of the representative of the states, as it was at the time, it was designed to be, in the Senate would, take the advice and try to work something that was maybe not quite as virulent as may have come from the House. And that worked really well for a long time. Has it always worked perfectly? Of course not. Unless what you're actually looking for is for Congress to do something.
Well, that's the problem. That is the major...
That is the main problem.
That is the major cultural change. Congress does
not always need to do something.
Yeah, this whole there ought to be a law thing, it has really grown, especially in my lifetime. But I think it really started in the 30s through the 1960s. The shift in the culture from the idea that the federal government should be doing as little as possible because we can do it better at the state or in the city or in our county, to the federal government has to do everything. And there,
it's difference between like Coolidge and FDR. I mean, which was not that far apart. And Woodrow Wilson I was certainly of the state should do everything and be in charge of everything. This was progressive versus the silent cows of America saying, we're pretty good being left alone. It's okay. You don't need to get involved.
And look, culturally, the progressives of the early 1900s have largely won on a cultural basis. Because anytime there is any problem, the first response is, what's the federal government going to do about it? And the federal government's response to many problems should be nothing.
That's right. I mean, look, you brought up the ATF earlier. Where's that based in the Constitution? Why does that agency even exist? Alcohol is now something that is verboten for the federal government to regulate. Tobacco, I don't know where that comes from in the Constitution for Congress to regulate. And firearms, well, it's explicitly settled that Second Amendment says, no, keep your hands out. That's not allowed.
Yes, well, much of the Constitution is now, as Shakespeare once said, more honored in the breach than the observance.
The observance, yeah.
All right, well, let's do it. Let's talk
into the fireworks.
Let's talk about the
like little rally.
Yeah, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Joe Biden's debate performance this week, and I was watching it. My phone beeped, and it was you texting me, "Are you watching this?" And my response was, "Oh yeah, I'm watching." If you watched the first 30 minutes of that debate, and I would argue that two things happened in the second half of that debate. Number one, Trump became less focused, and thus kind of went a little bit off the track. And Joe Biden became slightly more focused, which I presume are the drugs finally kicking in. But that first half hour showed us a man who is not really capable. The first thing I noticed, knowing what the rules of this debate were, it is in a closed studio. Aside from the cameraman, there are 4 people there. the two moderators and the two candidates. And Joe Biden came in. Hi, how you doing? Hello. Who you waving at, Joe? There's literally no one there. And then again, he was mumbly, he was hoarse, his responses were often nonsensical or incomprehensible, one of the two. If you are a non-political person and you have been told, and well, we'll get to that in a second, but you've been told that Joe Biden behind closed doors is sharp and is intellectually sharp. And look, I've got a clip. For copyright purposes, I'm not going to play it, but on MSNBC, Morning Joe, having Joe Scarborough talk out there and saying, look, this is Biden at his best. I've known the man for years, and he is sharper and more focused than I have ever seen him. Okay.
He doesn't protest too much.
Okay. Well, now we got to see him without being shielded by staff, without being sent into scripted events where he can read off a teleprompter and then leave or be guided off the stage, as the case may be. It was now just him. I think the format was good because you couldn't talk over each other. They silenced their microphones. They were very good on keeping you to the time limit. And in that, where it's just you having a back and forth, having to parse the statements of your opponent, come up with counter arguments, Joe Biden looked like he did not know what he was doing for that first 30 minutes on stage. And if you are a non-political person and you've been told all this stuff about Joe losing a step, that's all just cheap, fake videos, blah, blah, blah. I think you got an eye-opening experience, and probably when it went to that first commercial, a lot of people just tuned out and said, oh, this is not good.
Yeah, I don't want to see the bloodbath.
Yeah, I think the Babylon Bee had a story, Donald Trump indicted for murder of elderly man on CNN. Because at least in the first half of that. Now in the second half of that, it kind of went off of the rails. They had a 10-minute disquisition on who had the better golf handicap. Hey, way to connect.
That was hilarious.
Way to connect with the working man, fellas. Arguing over your golf handicaps. But
you know what, though? Well, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but that first half of the debate, that I think showed us probably what Joe Biden is like anytime after 4 p.m. in most cases. And I thought it was hilarious. The backpedaling that went. And I wrote a tweet about it this week, how it started versus how it's going. This is the New York Times last week.
Right.
Misleading videos are trailing Biden as he battles age doubts. A flurry of recent clips, many of them edited or lacking context, laid bare a major challenge for the president as he tries to persuade voters he has the energy for second term. So we've already framed it. Sure, Joe Biden looks like a doddering old man, but this is because of these misleading videos, all of which are taken out of context, deceptively edited. That was last week in the New York Times. This was Friday in the New York Times. The greatest public service President Biden can now perform is to announce that he will not run for re-election. Well, that's a bit of a switch.
Sort of a reversal there, right?
Yeah, when you've lost the New York Times.
It's such a common phrase now that everybody knows it, but you do not hate the media enough. They hid this shit for 4 years. They've been hiding this stuff. They knew. They always knew. Everybody in the media knew. Anybody that has contact with Joe knew. They lied. They obfuscated. They hid. They spun. And this is just the media, not his own comms team, just the media. What they're pissed about and what they're upset about and now afraid of is the fact that everybody else saw it.
Well, look,
there's no more excuses they can make. I mean, they're still making them, obviously, but it's just so obvious he's beyond his capacity. He's incompetent.
The finger pointing has already started.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Biden's close aides have carefully shielded him from people inside and outside the White House. Okay, now we're pulling out the names of people to blame.
Right.
Biden's
Gotta
behavior
get your scapegoats
stunned.
in order.
Yeah, because Biden's closest aides, often led by Jill Biden's top aide, Anthony Bernal, and Deputy Chief of Staff Annie Tomasini, took steps early in his term to essentially rope off the president. So it's kind of like an Edith Galt Wilson deal here, where President Wilson had a stroke in 1919, I believe. He was semi-conscious at best, comatose for most of the time. And what would happen is that Edith Galt Wilson would go into the bedroom in the West Wing of the White House, sequester herself with the president for 30 minutes, and then step outside the bedroom and tell his cabinet secretaries what the president's wishes for that day were. And that's how the government was ran for about a year until, of course, the 1920 election when what's his name? The Ohio guy.
Taft.
No, wasn't Taft.
A
return to normalcy. Oh, white hair. Got Teapot Dome scandal. I know everything but his name. Replaced by Calvin Coolidge. I cannot believe. Please, someone in chat. Hi, chat, by the way. I see that you're there. If you can tell me who the president was elected
to
Harding, Warren G. Harding.
Yeah, Warren G. Harding. Yeah.
His middle name was Gamaliel. How do I know that? I don't know any more than I know how come I couldn't figure out what his name was 5 seconds ago. But yeah, Warren G. Harding. But the fact is, Wilson's wife pretty much was president of the United States for about a year because he was incompetent. And this is one of the things that people, certainly some people on the right, have been worried about, is who is actually running the show. Is it actually Joe? Or are they just propping Joe up as a figurehead? And that is a question I think has some relevance after what we saw on Thursday night. Although I will point out one thing that as slow as he's gotten, one thing that Joe Biden can still do is he can look straight at the camera, lie with the straight face, and say the most outrageous things.
He has never lost that skill.
Apparently,
that's not a cognitive skill.
Yes, that's a personality skill, and by golly, Joe Biden has it.
Oh, you should put up that thing I sent you with the last text I sent you.
I'm not sure what what
look,
one.
Look.
Well, let's see. We're looking at. Is it the Hawk Tuah thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, with Jill Biden yelling at somebody. Yeah, well, I saw that about it, but Joe Biden doesn't have enough. There's two problems. Number one, Joe Biden cannot finish a second term. He just won't.
I don't even think they want him to. I don't think they care if he does or does not. I mean, they haven't cared about him at all. You know, there's a reason that elder abuse hashtag is bouncing around, and it has been, not just recently. It's been bouncing around for quite a while, because as much as I have no sympathy for Joe Biden, as evil a person as he is, it is elder abuse what they've been doing to him. This is the ambitions of Jill Biden. It has nothing to do.
It certainly seems like that. It certainly seems like this is a Jill Biden thing. Although, having said that, Joe Biden has wanted to be president for 50 years.
Forever. That's right. That's what he thought his destiny was. He thought he was the next young Jack Kennedy.
Yeah, and he made it. But in the aftermath of that debate, things aren't looking good. CBS News poll, 72% of respondents, it's gone up from 65%. 72% now say he does not have the cognitive health to serve as president, then why is he still there? Because
why isn't he being 25th Amendmented?
that's the issue. We got a glimpse of, if this is what Joe Biden is like on a day-to-day basis, is this the guy we want with his finger on the, well, there is no nuclear button, but if there was, he would have his finger on it. And is this a guy that we can trust?
Do we want him going and meeting world leaders anymore? They have to constantly drag him around and redirect them. And like, they don't know what the hell he says. They look embarrassed when he talks.
Yeah, but getting back to our system of government, we have two ways to get rid of that guy.
And
25th Amendment and impeachment.
And 25th Amendment solidly puts Kamala Harris into the driver's seat.
Yeah, well, so does impeachment. I mean, look, there's no way of getting rid of Joe Biden that does not put Kamala Harris in as president.
Except if he releases his delegates.
Yeah, but now, but again, our quandary, if this is what he's like now, can we afford another 7-8 months of him being president of the United States? I mean, if
look at even the Frank Lutz panel, he had 14 undecided voters. 12 of them were like, no, Trump's better. I mean, it was, and they were like, after seeing that, I don't, 4 months, I don't know if he can go 4 days, much less 4 years.
Yeah, and he is president
and
right
this isn't
now.
Just coming from undecideds or from the right. The Democrats are in full panic mode. They have already started scheming their Torricelli option, and they are going absolutely ballistic. The New York Times came out.
Not all of them.
To step aside. Washington Post came out and said he had to should step aside.
Yeah. What's his name? Hoodie boy from Pennsylvania, Fetterman.
Fetterman. Yeah.
Did come out and said everybody needs to calm the F down.
Well, he's also mentally handicapped, so
he's once again John Fetterman, the voice of reason. But
he has been good on the Israel stuff, though.
But there's no way to get rid of Joe Biden now. That doesn't mean Kamala Harris is not president. And by the way, the quandary, here's the quandary that the Democrats have. They have several quandaries. First of all, you have states whose state law says we have to know who the president is by X date, or who the nominee is by X date. And we can't change it after that date. I mean, unless they die.
Right.
Okay, well, first of all, I think Wisconsin is one of those states, and which seems like an extraordinarily stupid law because it assumes a continuity of life over a period of time that may not be reasonable. And so why are we making decisions in June at the state level about who the nominee of a party whose convention will not occur until August is going to be? That just seems
but
like
they knew when
overreach.
the last. But they knew that when the last, date was. I think it's Ohio. They knew when it was, and they picked that date anyway.
Okay, but look, that's different. That was a state level Democratic convention where they knew what the law was. It has been kind of honored in the breach in the past, but this is a state who is saying we have to know who the nominee is for both parties by the end of June so that we can print our ballots and stuff. By the end of June, we don't have party national conventions until August. In fact,
right,
that's the way it's been for, about 150 years now. So.
And why is that? Because of mail-in voting, because they've extended the date of voting. So in order to print up those ballots and get them out to people, in some states, they just mail them to everybody.
Okay, fine. But still, June is a dumb thing for a state to do when the national
so
parties...
So is early voting.
When the national parties don't declare a nominee until August. So they're declaring that they know who the nominee is going to be 2 months before the national convention. What happens if Joe Biden does just
Dies.
drop dead, then who's the
Right.
nominee going to be? What will you do with your ballots then? It's a dumb law, but the state officials are saying, well, if he gets onto the ballot, we have no way of putting a new nominee on the ballot, and that's one of the arguments the Democrats are making to keep Joe Biden.
Kinko's is closed from August to November.
Yeah, exactly. So, however, that aside, you have all of these, we have changed fundamentally the way that we elect nominees now, right? Because it used to be that nothing really mattered until the convention. You kind of maybe had an idea who the nominee might be, but it wasn't until the convention that it became clear. And look, that was true right up at least until 1964. And post 1964, we began to have these primary elections. And we switched over to primary elections that we have from January to April. And now we know who the nominee is in late April, early May. And there's this interregnum of where nothing really much happens until the party's convention ratifies it in August. And the thing is, one of the rules in both parties is that once you have the primary election, when you go trotting into your national convention, you are locked in, at least on the first vote, for voting for whoever won the primary in your state.
Right.
If Joe Biden were to drop out of the race, then what happens? I mean, presumably he releases his delegates.
Then it becomes an open convention, but Kamala Harris... Kamala
Harris.
Kamala?
Harris.
Kamala. Okay. So like Carmel, but Amalama. Anyway, she would have, I think, a very strong legal case to say, no. I was on the ballot for every one of those primary votes as his running mate. So if his votes are released, they're released to me, not to the open delegation. I think she's got a fairly strong case to say that. And trust me, whether it's strong or weak, she's going to push it.
Sure, she's going to say that, and it's going to go nowhere because the Democrats know that she's not electable. She never got more than 3% in any Democratic primary whenever she was running. Democrats don't like her. Even Democrats know she's dumb and arrogant, and they don't want her as the nominee. And I think
she's a black woman.
And I think one of the greatest disservices that Joe Biden did to the country was nominating her as his vice president. Because now we have a twofer problem. A, how do we get rid of Joe? And B, how do we do so without elevating Kamala Harris, who nobody wants?
Hey, I don't care. Put either one of them up.
Again, that's not my problem. But still, that's the Democratic argument. And so, yeah, Bob Torricelli, Gavin Newsom. In fact, the Babylon Bee, the day after the debate, ran a headline: Gavin Newsom hospitalized for 3-hour erection, because he must see his chance. I'm sure there's a lot of people that see their chance. The thing is, as far as we can tell, based on what we're hearing, is Joe Biden ain't going to quit.
Yeah, great.
Which, by the way...
Oh, you know what? I had a couch that looked just like that dress.
Yes. I think everybody's had a couch that looks like one of Joe Biden's dresses. Very, very popular prints from the 1950s and 60s. But they were at Camp David today, and apparently they're and by they, I mean Jill, has decided he's going to stay in the race. And look, if I'm Donald Trump, do I want anybody else in the race?
I mean, I don't think he cares personally. I mean, he would tear apart Kamala, obviously, but even Gavin Newsom would. I mean, Gavin Newsom couldn't even handle Ron DeSantis. He's not going to be able to handle Trump. Now, he does look slicker, and he will get all the benefit of the doubt from the Democratic media. But all Donald Trump has to say is like, do you want to move to California? Do you want to go there? You know how much more it's going to cost you to live there? This is the state he created. Is that what you want for the rest of the country? Defeating him is easy as hell.
Well, okay. Appreciated. I'm not entirely sure it's correct. Certainly, there are arguments that Trump could make against Newsom. And for people, again, who pay attention to politics, those might be effective arguments.
Sure, yeah, no, you're right. I'm not arguing for the right medium.
In
Correct.
terms of the election itself, our choice now is, to put it in the most derogatory way possible, two old men, neither of whom are super popular. In fact, both of whom have fairly high negatives. If one of them goes and is replaced by someone who has name recognition but does not have a record at the federal level that people know much about, there is, I think, perhaps not a majority, but I think a fairly large constituency who would say, look, Biden had his chance, he's gone. Trump had his chance, he lost. Let's start over. And I think if I'm Trump, just on that basis alone, I really hope Joe Biden gets his way and stays in the race, because I think Joe Biden, look, we've said this before, this is the most winnable election for a Republican candidate since 1984. And I think that the Republicans are hindered somewhat by the fact that Trump is deeply unpopular with so many people. It doesn't matter whether that's justified or not. It's just a fact. Joe Biden, right, deeply unpopular with a whole bunch of people. Again, a fact. If this race shifts like that and we get a new candidate who doesn't have that same level of unpopularity, then I think that does become a threat to Trump being elected again.
I see your point. And maybe to bolster it a little bit, I have seen plenty of polls that say neither candidate is acceptable with large majorities.
Yeah, the CBS poll we looked at before also is just about as bad on Trump as, not as bad as it is on Biden, but
right,
basically a
but
majority.
Either way, neither one of them are anybody's first choice. So,
well, I wouldn't say anybody's.
You have a good point.
I wouldn't say anybody's, but for a majority of the electorate, neither Joe Biden or Donald Trump are their first choice as candidate.
Right. For a good majority of people who might go either way, call them independents, call them moderates, call them the unengaged. It does seem that if any other option, and they do have another option in RFK Jr., although he seems to draw mostly from Biden, he does draw from Trump. I don't know. It's a good question. You make a good point. It's clear that Trump's negatives prevent him from having, some kind of Reagan-esque landslide.
Yeah, there's not going to be a 49 state landslide for Trump, no matter how badly Biden performs.
But at the same time, I think most people will either not show up, vote some weird third party, or they're going to go Trump. I mean, I just, that's just from what I'm seeing. That's anecdotal. That's not, there's no scientific basis.
I think if everything stays status quo ante from now to November, there's an excellent chance of Trump being reelected.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is deeply unpopular. And if it doesn't look like he can do the job now, much less 2 years from now if he gets reelected, I think that all works for Trump. I think if
But I
Joe
don't think
Biden drops out and you switch him with RFK, I think that's a problem. RFK is a populist too. Now, he's a populist from the left, but he's as much of a populist as Donald Trump is.
I
And now
agree.
you have populist v. populist. And look, there's not a lot of negative stuff about RFK out there, although I'm sure the Republicans will manage to dig some up pretty quick.
I
But
don't know.
the
The Democrats have put out a bunch of negative stuff about him.
Yeah, well, that's true. But same thing with Bernie Sanders. Whenever he was running against Hillary, everybody knew who they wanted, so Bernie had to be destroyed. And right now, it is to keep Biden alive. We've got to get rid of his primary opponent. Okay, great. If Biden is no longer in the race, then what do we do? It it opens everything up wide open. And I think because of Trump's negatives, and look, let's not pretend that one of the reasons Donald Trump didn't win in 2016 was because Hillary Clinton at the time was a historically unpopular political figure.
Absolutely. That's the main reason he won.
And now we have a race between two historically unpopular figures because Joe Biden, in the space of 4 years, has managed to make himself relatively despised in terms of his competence and decision-making ability, which, by the way, I could have told you prior to the 2016 election. That's so utterly predictable. But he didn't really have a record because who cares what senators do? And really, who cares what vice presidents do? Well, now that he's president, the decisions he makes matters, and he's god awful at it. So now we have two historically unpopular candidates who are vying for the presidency. If one
And
of
yet,
them,
but how do their agendas compare? I mean, people remember. This is the thing I hear from, well, my friends are black men, not so much from the black women, but from black men, is that like, no, I was making bank under Trump, and that was good. And I got promised all this stuff. None of it came to happen. I see things as worse, and all I see are the lies. And they're just not down with Joe Biden. I'm not saying they're necessarily going to vote Trump. There's still a lot of reticence in the black community to vote Trump, but
yeah, I don't like Joe
it's lessened.
Biden is often code for I'm just not going to vote, not I'm going to vote for his opponent.
Absolutely, yeah, that I agree with that. And that's the sort of feeling I get. I don't know. I can't say this is all anecdotal. This is not research. Um, I just I get the feeling from things I've watched, from people I've talked to, that in the black community, especially amongst men of working age, and especially those with children, um, are like, I was doing a lot better before, and all these lies about how I'm doing so much better and how things are so great for me, they're just not true.
And as
You know,
long as Joe Biden remains in the campaign, that is relevant. The second that Joe Biden leaves, if indeed he does, none of that is relevant anymore. Because now we instantly don't care what Joe Biden did for the last 4 years. Now we're
there's
looking
no
ahead.
transitive property in politics.
Yeah. And so now we have a guy who was president from 2016 to 2020, who is a known quantity and who people either like or dislike, and for whom there is not a lot of undecideds in the middle,
True.
versus someone new who gets to come into this de novo. And how
Yeah,
much?
you know what?
What
That's
is
the
the
biggest problem
what
with
is the
Trump.
exhaustion vote going to be? With
Yeah.
what if we never have to hear either of these two guys again? How big
Well,
a vote is that?
that's a lot how like Trump is like Hillary Clinton. He's a polarizing figure who, like Hillary Clinton, like you're either for or against. There's not a lot of in betweens. It's either you're for or against. And she was so polarizing, still is. And Trump has that same, and again, for either of them, whether it's deserved or not, this is just reality. This is how people see things. And Trump is not particularly popular. However, in the sense that people are even paying attention to policy, they're paying attention to their politics. This goes back to the old James Carville thing back in the 90s. It's the economy, stupid, right? And the economy has not been good. It's gone downhill. Now, obviously, it went downhill under COVID, but we've all seen. We showed them here on Q&O. We've all seen the spike in the downturn and then the great upturn, which didn't get us back to normal, but it got us back to something at least verging towards normal. And then that just died in January 2020. And we just plummeted. We had 9% increase in interest rates within the first year. We had overall, I think, something like a 20% increase over the last 3.5 years, 4 years.
Doubling gas prices.
Food prices have skyrocketed to the point where food companies have to change how they market and package things in order to get the price cheap enough, but also attractive enough for people to actually keep buying the stuff. Steak is having an awful time right now.
Yeah, look,
I know the beef industry.
Look, I day before yesterday, for my birthday on Friday, Chris said, "I'll buy you dinner," and I picked a local restaurant that is a favorite. And they delivered our food. Their prices have not changed. It's the same price I've always paid to buy a dinner for two from them. And they delivered our food. And the food comes in these, and maybe you've seen them before. They're these long, sort of flat aluminum trays that have an aluminum top that you put over it. And it's everything. It's Middle Eastern food. So you've got all the saffron rice and the couscous and the shawarma and all the other stuff in there. And it was a decent size. It fed both of us. It was great. And then Chris said something to me about, this is so much smaller than it used to be. And, again, I'm seeing the little plate or the little, aluminum container. And I was like, are you sure? And she goes, yeah. And then I started thinking about it. Wait a second. Look at the number of items that they put in. And then I remembered, wait, we saved, because they're so useful, we saved one of those aluminum trays because you can cook in them again. I went to the cabinet, opened it up, pulled that aluminum pan out, and it's literally double the size of the one that we got on Friday night. Yeah. And I started thinking, wait, they used to put, 2 chicken kebab and 2 beef kebabs, and they're now putting 1 in. They used to put in, 2 skewers of tandoori chicken, now they put in 1. And it's like, oh, you're right. They're giving us half the food that they used to give us at the same price.
Because it cost them twice as much to put it on the table.
Yeah, exactly. So to get the meal that I would have gotten from the tray that I found in my cabinet, I would have had to pay $130, $140 for a meal for 2 people.
Right.
Rather than 60. And I was thinking, we used to get 4 meals out of that, right? We both eat when it got here, then we put it in the fridge, then the next day we both got 2 more meals out of it. So we were getting 4 meals, and now we're getting basically 2 out of it.
And people notice that, and they're, they don't eat out as much. Choosing cheaper options. I mean, what are there? I mean, when it costs about the same to go to McDonald's as it does to Applebee's, what are you going to choose?
Well, we're getting off topic. I think it would be a net plus for the Democrats if Joe Biden were to drop out and they were to find somebody else. I think on balance,
a net plus for America, frankly, but
it'd be a net plus for them. However, there is a not insignificant portion of opinion which has been expressed in chat. Come on, guys. Doesn't matter who wins. things are going to get really ugly in November.
I absolutely agree. I've been saying this for I don't know how long. I don't know. It doesn't. I don't know that it matters who wins. The other side is going to go ballistic. It's just I don't see how they're. I think it's inevitable. And matter of fact, the left is already promising that they're going to go ballistic if they don't get their way, and the right is going to feel cheated. And it's how do you govern a country with two fundamentally opposed ideologies?
Well, here's what I find fascinating. The left, who assure us that January 6th was an attempted coup. It was a rebellion against the government of the United States rather than just a riot that got out of hand. Okay, fine. So what happens if you lose in November? Well, they've already done the ideological prepping of the battlefield by telling us, oh, look, this election is about democracy. If Donald Trump wins, we will lose our democracy. Now, nobody has come out and said this. Nobody has made it explicit. But once you start saying that if Donald Trump wins, our democracy is over because he is a dictator in waiting. Yeah, sure, he left the first time, but ignore that. He's a dictator in waiting. Okay, you've now just at least made the intellectual justification for why...
For revolution.
Yeah, for a revolution. We will not live under Donald Trump. We will not accept the results of this election. If this election is truly about democracy, and Donald Trump will in fact destroy democracy if he's elected and become a dictator, then what other choice do you have rather than some sort of insurrection if Donald Trump wins? You've certainly laid all of the intellectual groundwork to morally justify an insurrection.
Yep.
And look, on the other side, there is, and I've heard this as well, Donald Trump will win unless they cheat. And if they cheat, we don't have a democracy anymore. Neither of those two arguments is a argument for the peaceful transition of power.
Yeah, that's true. And let's remember what happened last time Donald Trump got inaugurated. It was an absolute chaotic situation downtown in DC. I remember very well, being just a couple miles from it. And it was awful. There were cars burned, there were riots, there was absolute pandemonium. And nobody was arrested, of course, because why arrest them? They're just angry. I don't, I've been saying this for a long time. I don't know that we can stick together as a country because we cannot live peacefully under the same, governance body. Unless it's all ours, then it doesn't matter. If it's all ours, fine with us, but it's going to be awful for the other side. So we just have a fundamental disagreement as how the country should be run, and what this American experiment is all about.
And look, it's not just here, because this is not something that we were planning on talking about tonight, but we might as well, because again, in chat, France is having a small spot of trouble at the moment. Le Pen's party winning over the parliamentary elections.
I'm glad we actually got to talk about it. I was surprised we got this far. But
Marine Le Pen and her National Front appears to have, in the first
National
round...
Rally.
Or National Rally, in the first round of the French elections, appears to have delivered a severe hiding to Emmanuel Macron and has won. This is already being told to us via, Politico.eu and other European media. This is a victory of the far right.
Far right.
And of course, the protesting and rioting, presumably, has already started off in Paris. And
I'll continue.
Yeah, and well, that's kind of the French thing. You lose, and the first thing you do is you riot. And if you're a farmer, you dump poo on the national monuments. And if you're an immigrant, you blow up cars. That's just how France operates nowadays.
And then you put on your jacket jaune and you go wandering around.
I don't know that we are very far away from that.
I agree. I don't think this is a Western world issue.
It's not specifically American.
I agree 100%. It's just that the most vocal are here in America and in parts of Europe. Australia, surprisingly, has been a little lax there. I heard somebody the other day describe Australia as the Texas of the Anglosphere.
Not quite.
But it's a good, it's a good place to start.
The problem, and it's a problem that goes far beyond America, it is, as you say, a Western civilization problem, is that in the West and generally, the people who run our government and our media, who I would call the political class, for lack of a better name, although I am hesitant to use Marxist terms like class. But the political class has latched on to a set of luxury ideologies that don't work for the common people.
I like that. Luxury ideologies. Expand upon that.
Whenever you're a rich movie star and you decide, let's say a female movie star, and you decide, I would like to have a child. Well, there is no bar, financially or otherwise, to you finding either having a child without a husband via artificial insemination or kiting off to some benighted heathen foreign land and adopting one of their children or more than one of their children and bringing them home. Because when you're making 10, 15, 20, $30 million per movie, and you can make 2 or 3 movies per year, you have the financial wherewithal to make decisions about childbearing that the average 18-year-old high school dropout cannot make, at least not without destroying their own lives. Having money and wealth and status and position gives you the ability to have these luxury beliefs, limousine liberalism, as Ronald Reagan used to call it, or limousine socialism, as is probably a better term for it. You've got yours. Once you're rich and you've got your 3 beachfront houses, you can be as socialist as you want. Because after all, you have yours. And the fact that your policy would prevent anyone else from having theirs doesn't matter to you, because for you, a luxury belief is perfectly valid. But there are certain luxury beliefs, like we should have unrestricted immigration into our country, whether it's Europe or the United States, from people from other cultures who do not appreciate our history or our system of government or the very concept of inviolable individual rights, and it'll be just fine. And look, if you are a member of the political class who is surrounded by 24-hour armed protection in gated communities and what have you, I'm sure it seems like a very reasonable idea. If you are a young, unskilled, or minority worker, bringing in a whole bunch of immigrants probably doesn't sound like a great idea. Again, it's a luxury belief that you can have when you are insulated from the realities that common people have to deal with. And it's one of the things that we're seeing in the UK, by the way, right now. The Labour Party literally dislikes working class voters in England. That's kind of the whole...
They're going to win. And let's be let's face it, they're going to win.
They're going to win, but look, it's also 14 years of conservative failure to do what the people asked them to do.
Absolutely,
is part of that as well.
Right. That's absolutely true.
Because these luxury ideologies are shared. We call it the uniparty in this country, where Republicans and Democrats all get together on these certain weird things that can be believed without risk
that
when you're part of the
patrician
political class, but that don't benefit the common people. And yeah, labor is going to win because labor has turned into a coalition of woke ideologues who don't have a place in any other party. And the values of that party are, if not antithetical to, at least contemptuous of, traditional working class values in Great Britain. And they're still going to win, by the way, because now the operating agenda for the Labour...
Tories fucked up.
Yeah, but the operating agenda for the Labour Party is to do the bare minimum they can to pretend to be concerned about working class concerns. This is the Labour Party. They're supposed to be the working class party. That's supposed to be the raison d'etre for their existence. And now they can barely stand to be in the same room as their working class voters. That is the problem.
Never heard of Cesar Chavez, apparently.
Yeah, that is the problem with Western governance as a whole, because once you get into that club, it becomes, I think something John McCain, of all people, back in the 1980s, complained about the culture of corruption in Washington. And I'm sure there's plenty of corruption in Washington. But even less, but even more insidious than the corruption is the ideological like-mindedness that you find yourself getting into with other people in the political class. Because now you all share certain objectives, irrespective of what your policy preferences might be. How do I increase my power? How do I get reelected? How do I stay here forever? How do I benefit from this position? And what we have and it's pretty much everywhere in the Western world. And by the way, the pendulum swinging back is what we're seeing in, both in Great Britain, although in a slightly different fashion, in France, in Italy with Giorgia Meloni, in the Netherlands with Geert Wilders. All of these people are being elected in response to a political system who is contemptuous of the actual interests of the common citizen. But they are highly sensitive towards doing whatever they can to ensure that the goals of the political class are supported in every possible way.
Right. It's still a top-down dirigee system. I mean, that's what they're trying to preserve. That's what they're trying to preserve here. That's what they're trying to preserve in Europe. They don't want the common folk to have any influence at all on what the laws are, what the regulations are, and what the direction of the government is. Because those rubes don't know shit. They don't know how hard we work to get you what you actually need, even though you don't think you need it. I mean, that is it's this paternalistic, you don't know what you're doing.
I'd love to give I'd love to give you a middle class tax cut. If only I could be sure you'd spend that money the right way.
Yeah. I mean, look, this has been this isn't new. And going back to the Chevron decision, which kind of cemented it for here, the fact that that's overturned opens up a lot of possibilities towards citizens actually taking more control of their own lives. And that is the thing that scares the political class more than anything. They don't want people to think for themselves. They want people to fend for themselves. They want them to be dependent, because that's where they derive their power.
And to the extent that they can do that, they'll support policies that do it. And look, Bringing in the immigration thing is a prime example of this. If we bring in a lot of immigrants, first of all, the people who benefit are the people in the political class. Their donor class, who depend on stagnant wages, that's where their money is coming from for their reelection. And the common people who now have to compete, if they are young, which by any definition, young means you're a low-skilled worker. If you're a low-skilled worker, you now face direct competition from wages for other low-skilled workers who are just being constantly imported into the country intentionally by the political class. Moreover, we just know, there's just, we can quibble about it, we can call it a conspiracy theory or whatever, but we know that people who come from non-Western countries have basically been, if not radicalized, at least propagandized towards socialism.
Absolutely.
And so
that is actually the world norm.
So we know when they come here that they are automatically going to be, if we allow them to vote, they're automatically going to be leftist voters. But
this is the devil's bargain that the Democrats have made to open the borders.
And even if we don't let them vote, the very fact that they go to largely blue states and they get counted in the census gives those blue states extra House seats. So we don't even have to go to their letting them vote. Although, guess what? Motor voter does.
They're voting.
You get a driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote. Why wouldn't you?
Mexico is specifically telling them to get registered to vote. With, the encouragement of our own State Department.
Sure.
Because,
And by the way, this is called a conspiracy theory, despite the fact that Rui Teixeira wrote a book on the subject 20 years ago now.
Yes.
About how bringing in immigrants would turn the country towards the left. And it's, much like the lab leak theory, this has become one of the modern conspiracy theories that we can't talk about. But it's not much of a conspiracy when you're writing books about how you're going to do it.
It's out there in the open. They've literally been talking about it for 2 decades.
And look, when you have something like wide open immigration, everybody benefits. The employers benefit from lower wages and lower costs, therefore higher profits. The politicians benefit because they get the campaign fundraising that they need from their donor class by doing what the donor class wants. Plus, certainly if you're on the left, you have some measure of political power, either directly or indirectly from that. I mean, everybody wins, except for the people who are looking for jobs.
Right. So, and
everybody but workers.
America doesn't win, because where most of that money that foreign nationals earn goes to?
Well, obviously they send it home. Sure.
Right. So we're not even getting the benefit of that economic opportunity.
So their families win. So
right.
The benefits are spread out.
And I don't blame them for doing it. Look, if I was in that situation and that was the opportunity I had, I'd do the same thing, especially with the lax enforcement. But that doesn't mean that we have to put up with it. I can't go waltz into Germany and set up shop and just do whatever the hell I want. There's going to be somebody coming around telling me that whatever I'm doing is verboten.
Yeah, well, actually, if you were from Libya, you could largely do that. Yeah,
that's true. Now, because I'm a white guy who kind of looks German,
you couldn't. But yeah, but I mean, that's what I talk. That's what has taken over Western governance. This whole concept of luxury ideologies, and as we've said many times, as we've said since 2016. Donald Trump is not the problem. Donald Trump is a symptom of a problem, of a governing system that literally doesn't care about the interests of the people over whom it's supposed to be exercising governance. There are certain people.
I remember reading something about, what's this document? Something about when The government no longer supports you. You are,
It is the right
I
of the
think,
people to alter or abolish it.
yeah, something about that. I think that I can't remember what it was. I don't know, but it seems sort of important.
Well, it's hard to see how we are not heading towards that. And look, what we're seeing is not unusual. We kind of think about America as being special and different, but what amazes me
It is
is
special and different.
it
What
is,
it's not
but it's
is immune from the laws of human frailty.
it's interesting to see that this is happening not just in America but all over the Western world.
Yeah,
And
we've invited
sometimes
the chaos.
sometimes the pendulum takes a long time to swing back. But certainly, as far as Europe goes, it looks like that swing has started.
Interestingly, you would have thought that would be after us, but we are way far on the pendulum swing from Europe. Europe is at least seeming to try to correct its past transitions.
Well, there are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, parliamentary governments don't have an election schedule.
Yeah, that's a good
Um,
point.
we do. And so, for anything to happen in our system, it can only happen at these specifically defined times.
And
We're,
that was by design.
yeah, whereas in Europe, look, there was no reason at all that Emmanuel Macron needed to call an election, even though
Yeah, was that like a dumb
yeah,
idea or
even
what?
though
I
his
just
his party got trumped in the European elections, so he just dissolves parliament and calls for a new election. Nobody made him. Nobody
right.
made Rishi Sunak in Great Britain walk out in the rain last month and get soaked while saying, "Hey, maybe you guys don't want me as prime minister anymore. Let's have an election on July 4th." Okay, that's what that's how parliamentary systems work. The prime minister gets to call. I mean, there is a maximum amount of time that you can serve in that a government can sit, and then parliament has to be dissolved. But a prime minister can call it all the time. So they are to a certain extent calling this down on their own heads. But we can't call it down on our heads here in this country because we have a specified schedule and things can only happen whenever the schedule says they happen. I mean, we do
Are you
have an
advocating for
orderly
a
system.
parliamentary system?
I'm not advocating, I'm just merely pointing out what are the obvious factual differences between how elections work there and how they work here. So our ability to change horses in midstream is pretty darn limited.
It is, although we did replace the Speaker of the House. Um, you're right that the parliamentary system does have certain advantages. The one thing is that the executive is tied up in the legislature, and that's why we don't want
Yeah, we
that.
want those two functions split up.
Right.
And we don't want a system where the president can simply dissolve Congress and call for new elections.
Right.
So, yeah, we have our system. So, we have to wait at minimum 2 year intervals, although really for us, it's a 4 year interval. People
It's a
don't
4 year.
people really don't pay attention except for every 4 years. And even then, they don't start paying attention until September. So our windows for huge change are pretty small and far few and far between. Whether there'll be a big change this time, I don't know. But this business as usual thing, I don't think it can go on. And one of the things that scares me about this election is that one side or the other, depending on who wins in November, is going to decide that they don't want it to go along anymore.
Yeah, that's exactly what I am fearful of and expecting is that there's going to be an opt out. And I'm worried that it's going to be a violent opt out. And that doesn't matter who wins. Um, yeah, like I've been saying, I just wonder if this is the last real election that the United States, as originally constituted, has, because the sides are so diametrically opposed and unwilling to live under each other's rule that I don't see anything good going forward.
I think I would say, in opposition to that, is that there are certain bells that people, no matter how much they might talk about it, there are certain bells that people don't want to ring. Because there is a general acceptance and understanding, I think, is that some bells once rung can never be unrung.
True.
And there are some decisions that you make that, no matter how confident you might be in their outcome, you can't ensure those outcomes. And if we start talking about some sort of national divorce, I don't think, whether it peacefully or otherwise, I don't think there's really any way for us to predict how that would turn out. You know, take a look at a state like California, right? Where you'd say, okay, well, we're just going to break off into our separate states. Oh, are we? Because maybe LA and Orange County and San Francisco might all like, and Marin County and those, you know, that coastal strip, maybe they would all like to live together. Is that true in Kern
Orange
County?
County?
Yeah, Orange County's Democrat now. There's Republican pockets, but it's largely Democrat. It's a California city. It's Democrat. Well, it's a collection of small California cities, but still, it's one big metropolitan area. But Kern County, some of the counties up in Northern California, Washington. I mean, hell, you've got counties in Washington that are already trying to join Idaho. If we decide to walk out and say, okay, all bets are off, we're rebuilding this place, we're reorganizing, well, why are your state borders inviolate? They're not. Why would they be? I mean, if we all get to decide... What are
you arguing here? You're arguing against me or with me?
Well, I'm not arguing. I'm just making the point that once you decide, I don't like the way this country is structured, I don't want to live under the other side's rules, and I want to go my own way, whatever side you may happen to be, whether you're on the left or the right. Okay, fine, but then let's not assume that, well, California's a left state, so we get to keep all 41 million people in California. No, not so fast. If we're going to start,
I agree.
If we're going to start redrawing borders, we get to redraw everything. You don't get to say, oh, we're going to break everything up in a way that's only in my benefit. No.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. I think it leads to a lot of turmoil and border skirmishes. It's not a pretty picture by any imagination, and I don't want it to happen. You know, one of the reasons that Andrew Jackson fought so hard, and I know a lot of people aren't a fan of Andrew Jackson, but he did do some good things. And one of the things he did was he kept the United States together when the South first tried to revolt. He just said, no, you're not allowed to. Now, a lot of that's because he was Andrew Jackson, but he made it a point that we need to stick together. If we don't stick together, we're toast.
Well, look, we've been going at this for about an hour and a half, so we're going to have to shut it off here pretty quick. But I would say one thing. If somebody decides to pull the trigger on, I want to break the country up, we need to have a national divorce, and everybody agrees.
Like Article 5 convention or something.
Yeah, okay, fine. Now tell me what that does to the U.S. dollar. Tell me what that does to our debt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me what that does to the
alone.
Tell me what that does to the global economy. What currency are you going to use to buy oil? It's not the implications in any kind of national divorce go way beyond, is my county going to be in the blue part or is it going to be in the red part?
Right.
It's going to
my
be
HOA God.
It's going to be, do I have
them?
It's going to be, do I have any life savings left, or has everything I done for my entire life been worthless?
Am I going to have a home left? Are we going to get invaded? Like,
yeah. So,
does southern or southwestern United States become narco heaven?
Yeah, these are all important questions that this glib, we'll just have an amicable national divorce. Oh, will ya? And how do you think
at this point we can't?
Yeah, how do you think that's gonna work? So anyway, like I said, hour and a half. We've talked enough. We're done.
Cheers,
Everybody
y'all.
get on with your week. Have a great week, Michael. We'll talk to you next time.
Happy July 4th.
Yeah, you too. You've been watching the Observations podcast for Sunday, the 30th of June, 2024. Thanks for watching. We appreciate the fact that you do. We'll look forward to talking to you again next time. Until then, so long.